The hum began as a trespass only Wren Armitage could perceive, an infrasonic pressure that seemed to weigh on his bones, blooming behind the ears in a faint, nauseous ripple. Solace Bluff sold itself on curated serenity. Wind-tuned hedges, lamp-posts that dimmed with lunar cycles, ambient birdsong arranged by algorithm. Yet Wren's quiet had a small thief in it, punctual as a clock wound by invisible hands. Every 19 minutes, precisely, a low-frequency pulse rolled through his townhouse like a tide that never fully receded. He tried to be empirical, because that was who he was, X-Systems modeler at Lumen Prospect, proud apostle of the scatterplot. He calibrated an off-the-shelf acoustic meter, mapped hotspots, marked the crest of each pulse with a pencil tick in a black notebook that smelled faintly of cedar oil. The readings sharpened near the back wall that faced the neighborhood relay stone, a slate gray plinth that most people mistook for public art and never looked at twice. Wren did. He listened. He logged. He watched his neighbor Eamon Harlow buff his driveway with the same slack smile every morning, like a saint of tidiness. Eamon waved sometimes. Wren tried to wave back without resentment. The association's app responded to Wren's report with pastel professionalism. All sound values are within municipal norms. He asked his co-working group, silence or jokes. He asked his reflection. It had nothing better to say. On day 10, he moved the couch by centimeters, installed whisper curtains, taped a blanket over an outlet when the pulse seemed to leak through it. The hum remained. He tried white noise, ocean surf, ringed gas giant storm, woodland stream. It only taught him the profile of the thing he wanted to drown. 19 minutes. 19. Folas they rieti contribers in roll absuaries lees were weighed in disabridged to be mixed to be through. On the ball of the balls words in disabridged did the wait. At 2:11:1 sleepless morning he drew the cycle as a helix and hated himself for how beautiful it looked. When he finally filed a formal complaint with the Solace Bluff Security Bureau, he kept adjectives out of it. Persistent sub-bass resonance. Durational. Probable fixed source broadcast. Cycle time. 19:06. He attached charts and a smile that no one had requested. He expected a drone. He expected a shrug. He did not expect the knock to carry a voice. Mr. Armitage? Officer Voss. May I come in? Wren opened the door and forgot his rehearsed politeness. The woman on his stoop was not quite human and not remotely ordinary. She was tall but self-contained, a silhouette of contained strength under slate blue patrol fatigues. Orange fur, burnished copper at the edges, sunset over a wheat field, framed a face that leaned foxward without tipping into animal caricature. A slender, elegant muzzle, keen eyes, amber bright, triangular ears that rotated minutely as if parsing the neighborhood the way a pianist tests a key. I'm Officer Sera Voss, she said, contralto steady and unbothered by his stare. You reported a durational noise anomaly. Yes, Wren managed. Yes. Thank you for coming in person. It's not loud. It's patterned, she finished, stepping inside with a grace that didn't displace the dust. May I see your logs? She stood at his table, the tip of one ear canted toward the relay stone beyond the glass. She read like a professional and a predator. Rapid, iterative passes, then a slow second devour. Harmonic decay charted. Amplitude drift minimal. 19-minute cadence. Wren nodded, too grateful for the absence of the usual skepticism to form good sentences. I tried to disprove myself. I kept failing. Sera unclipped a cylinder from her belt, standard issue sonic wand, and swept the baseboards, the ceiling seam, the crowned edge of that back wall. The wand's tiny hollow readouts flickered unromantically. Ambient HVAC noise, appliances muttering, cars breathing. No anomaly. As I expected, she said, and Wren's stomach iced. Then, but your data is careful, so I'm not closing this. She straightened, ears swiveling once, and did something Wren had never seen an officer do. She closed her eyes and listened with her whole body. Her tail, he hadn't noticed it until then, sleek and fox bright, stilled. The house held its breath. After half a minute she exhaled, the smallest shake of her head. Nothing in my range. Her ears dipped, apologetic, then rose again, resolute. If it's masking, instruments at the precinct can do a deeper sweep. Leave the case open. If it worsens, contact me directly. His phone chimed with her card. Sera Vos, Field Unit 9. Does anyone else report this? He asked, because the question had been gnawing a hole in him. Not in Solace Bluff, Sera said, but similar complaints exist elsewhere with no standard resolution. We treat them as infrastructure hum. We treat a lot of things as Solace Bluff woke breezy and beige. The hum kept time like an invisible metronome trained to Wren's ribs. He cross-referenced energy draw logs from the public utility map, an unforgivable breach of his retirement vow to never read bureaucratic XML again, and found a whisper-thin dip in power to his street that coincided with the attack phase of the pulse. Statistical lint, the sort of artifact most dashboards politely ignore. He annotated it anyway, watched the 19-minute march, realized he was waiting for his doorbell like a teenager. When it chimed, he actually smiled at himself. Sera stood there not in uniform but in charcoal tunic and work trousers, hair bound back with a simple band that looked like copper. Without armor, she read less as a silhouette and more as person, shoulders broad, posture unthreatening, eyes bright with unslept thought. I was on my way home, she said bluntly. I kept thinking about your cadence chart. You mentioned a sharpening at onset. Describe that. It's like a chime under the bass, Wren said. A clarifier note, half a second long. Sera closed her eyes. Ears angled toward the relay stone, then, not to it, but just off it, as if listening for a reflection in the next room. She went absolutely still, a statue of tendon and intent. The hum rose. A copper ear flicked. Sera's eyes opened at once. I heard a bright edge, she said softly, a hint of triumph she tried and failed to repress. Brief. Very far. Enough. Relief hit Wren so hard he had to steady himself on the table. He laughed, because crying would have been melodramatic and also accurate. Lunch? He blurted. Synth cedar salmon? My culinary printer actually does it justice. Sera's mouth made a small shape that might have once been unused for yes. I have time, she said. They ate at the corner table. He told her about Lumen Prospect, the models no one read, the merger that turned nuance into synergy, the buyout that bought him a curated cul-de-sac and a problem he couldn't solve. She told him about the academy, that the weight room had been a rest day. It was the stillness drills that felt like drowning. Everyone sees us as velocity, she said, looking at her hands. The work is restraint. They drifted back to the relay stone. I'm requisitioning a diagnostic, Sera said. Official channels are slow, but an unstable broadcast is a safety issue. She scrolled a request on her wrist, lines of law moving like water. If something changes, you call me. Not the app. Me. He walked her to the door, and they paused the way people do when their lives are tilting. In the corner of his eye, Eamon Harlow was doing something precise with a microfiber cloth to a solar panel that did not need it. Eamon's smile glanced off them like a dull spoon. 2 days later, the hum broke its Gregorian vow. It hit early and hard, a surge that punched Wren's sinuses, rattled the kitchen glass, and left a jagged, arrhythmic stutter in its wake. The house felt electrified, like a room after thunder. Fear's first instinct, flee. Wren's training's second. Record. He snatched the thing he'd spent the night building, a clumsy blossom of salvaged lenses, damped coils, and a flat-panel analog stage wired to a retired oscillator, and set it to drink the air. The waveform that splashed the screen was a snarl, furious and undeniable. He sent the raw capture to Sera with a note he did not remember typing. Her reply arrived fast. On my way. She came in uniform now, hair tightly bound, tail anchored in a tether that read as both practical and ritual. Show me, she said, And he did, and the word unstable ward was justified across her face. That gives me cause, she said. We go now. The relay stone wasn't a stone. Up close, after a thin panel hissed back under Sera's authorization code, it was a corridor of dark composite and dust-flavored air that led to a single chamber. Wren had expected server racks. What hung in the center instead was a lattice heart, an ovoid of cloudy crystal, webbed in copper filigree and braided cabling, humming like a prayer bowl someone refused to stop stroking. Wren forgot to be afraid. That's not a repeater, he said. That's a source. Sera's shoulder brushed his, a subtle repositioning from curiosity to guard. Overhead, something clicked. A black shape dropped from a barn door panel. Prism-bodied, single red sensor eye. Predator quiet. It did not warn. It spoke in charge-up whine, pitched to make the human lizard brain lock. Wren registered terror as distant commentary. Sera pivoted from cover in a smooth, low-line launch. The drone fired again. She wasn't there. She was on it. Fingers and seams, a muscle surge grunt, and a crunch like someone stepping on frozen branches. Sparks, silicon dust. The red eye guttered out. For a breath, all Wren could hear was the lattice heart. Sera's flank was a heave against his shoulder. He smelled ozone and faint citrus for soap and knew, with too much clarity, that he would follow her anywhere. Evidence, she said, breath controlled, and bagged the broken hunter like a fish she'd planned to catch. We leave. Now. The door sealed the hum back into its nest. The neighborhood looked exactly the same and exactly wrong. Sera drove like a surgeon, smooth, fast, with nothing theatrical in the speed. Wren held the drone bag as if it could still bite. Solace Bluff Bureau didn't look like a police precinct. It looked like a library that apologized for being inside. Sera keyed them through mirrors that weren't, through doors that were too polite, to a room that rejected the town's aesthetic. QLH, ARK, ER, the frosted glass read beneath a sticker. If you're reading this, you're in my way. Quill was younger than Wren expected and older in the eyes. Hair in a braid, a jacket scabbed with soldier scars, a mechanical hand so elegant it seemed to have decided on art. Voss, Quill said without looking up. You brought me homework. Sera set the evidence bag on a cleared space the size of a cutting board. Quill slid it open with a scalpel that hummed and murmured to the drone in a language it should not have understood. Armor flaked back. A port winked like a pupil. This isn't municipal, Quill said, connecting a fiber so thin Wren could only see it because it glowed. Code reigned. Quill's eyes did the same. Private sector, high-end, with a self-immolating memory core that kicks if you touch it wrong. Quill didn't touch it wrong, they coaxed. They whistled. They smiled sideways and fed it lies. After a minute, a logo unfolded in the air. Aurelia Dynamics, in gold ivy letters that made Wren's stomach close. Aurelia doesn't do neighborhoods, Sera said, but like a question aimed at a wall. Everyone knew Aurelia. Soft drink conglomerate turned data broker turned architecture of convenience. Officially, Quill said, they don't do anything. Unofficially, they do everything. This unit pinged a controller tagged to a front, harmony and wellness. Suburban division. Quill's mouth made a noise like a laugh choked on a cough. Cute name for a division that sends murder yo-yos to quiet cul-de-sacs. Wren's gut remembered Eamon's smile. Administrator? He asked. Quill's hand stilled. Encrypted. I can't reach without melting it. They turned to Sera. This isn't a noise complaint. This is a corporate lab with a homeowners association wrapped around it. Sera's jaw worked. Her eyes slid to Wren's hands. You're bleeding, he said before he thought he had that intimacy, and Sera glanced down at a tear on her wrist cuff she hadn't registered. The scrape beneath was angry but shallow. She said nothing. Wren said, Let me, in a tone that surprised him with its lack of question. In the break room, he cleaned it with competence learned on camping trips with people he no longer called. The world shrank to disinfectant and cotton, to the static hiss of the A/C and the warmth under Sera's fur. Thank you, she said, as if he'd done something he hadn't been authorized to do. You saved me first, he said, because not saying it would have been ridiculous under fluorescent lights. Quill didn't call. They burst in. Do not talk, they said, breathless. Just listen, and don't say the company name out loud because the room is friendlier than we are. They threw a projection into the air, schematics of the lattice heart, annotated with grudging awe. It's a psychoacoustic field generator, subaudible, multi-harmonic, targeted at whole number resonances of human autonomic rhythms. The goal isn't to be heard, it's to be worn. In English? Sera asked. It makes people easier, Quill said. Less swing. Shallow peaks, shallow valleys. Rage doesn't catch, grief doesn't anchor, ambition feels like too much work. You smile and you buy things because that's easier than the alternative. 99.9% don't perceive the overtone. 0.1 do. Quill flicked a finger at Wren's capture. Your man here is statistically impolite. Wren sat with the word easier, a memory returned, of standing in Solace Bluffs Community Square, watching a toddler fall, watching the fall. Quill looked unhappy. Encrypted, they repeated. But the drone mirrored its last assignment, a pacification protocol, to a local personnel file for legal reasons. I scraped the banner image. Eamon Harlow's corporate headshot glowed wall-sized. He looked like a man you'd ask to watch your plants. Wren thought about every conversation that had ended with Eamon's laugh like a dial tone. Administrator Harlow likely flagged an anomaly when you filed, Quill said. Drone mission reads observe, assess, pacify. Not kill, they added, for reasons that didn't comfort anyone. Wren didn't stand. He thought about going home and sitting very quietly in a chair while the hum put a patina on his fear. He thought about Sera's ears hearing a bright edge. He didn't have a hero in him, but he had a stubborn engineer, and that was sometimes adjacent. What's the source? He asked. That stone is a local heart. Where's the brain? Sera and Quill both turned a fraction toward the same image, the Founder's Helix, centerpiece of Solace Bluff Park. A spiraling sculpture of brushed steel set to symbolize the city's braided histories. It had a geothermal tap to power its illumination, a fact Wren had ignored as poetry. He called up the utility map again. The Helix's power draw was an insult to lighting. There, he said, and felt the room tilt and click. We cut the head. There wasn't time for a committee. Aurelia had the committees, and their conference rooms smelled like money. Wren had a garage full of parts that smelled like defeat, and was about to smell like ozone. We don't need to cancel the field, he said, sketching circuits so fast Sera had to tilt the paper to stop the words sliding off. We make it fight itself. A narrow beam scrambler, targeted at the Helix's control interface. Induce positive feedback in the crystal. It will tear its own song apart. And crystal shrapnel tears the park apart if you misjudge the threshold, Quill said dryly. Not misjudging, Wren lied like a man auditioning for a suicide mission and finding he wanted the role. Sera watched him with the attention of a hunter that had decided to guard, too. I get him to the door, she said. I get him the 5 meters he needs. Can you stand upright in a crossfire, Wren? I can kneel very professionally, he said. The scrambler came together like stubborn magic. He built it into a flat, brutal rectangle with a battered antenna and a suicide battery that Quill frowned at approvingly. Sera refit her belt with a low-slung pulse sidearm and a pair of flex cuffs. Quill packed a toolkit that had things in it that were probably illegal. Sera did one more thing. She sent a message into the bureau system that, if read by the wrong eyes, looked like a case closure. Spurious harmonic traced to park sculpture. Non-hazardous. Case closed. Wren read the subtext as if she'd said it aloud. We aren't asking for help. But if we don't return, don't build another Helix. Manufactured evening flowed over Solace Bluff like warm tea. They left not by the street but by the greenway, Sera moving at a lope that Wren needed half jogs to keep up with. She wasn't stealthy in a cinematic way, she was extremely practical. She knew where the cameras looked and where their blind cones overlapped like petals, and she walked him through the spaces in between. At the edge of the square, the Helix rose, beautiful and smug. Security bots rolled their lazy parabolas. Sera found his hand and squeezed once. Not romance, reassurance, an old academy signal, then became what she had tried so hard not to be: velocity. The plan lasted 14 seconds, which is impressive for plans of this sort. Sera's diversion, an artfully timed arc flash at a maintenance kiosk, drew the guards. Ren darted for the access panel. Scrambler clutched. He had one hand on the helix when a familiar voice behind him said, "Evening, neighbor." Eamon Harlow stepped from behind a support column with two gray-clad contractors at his flanks and a third somewhere Ren couldn't see. Eamon's smile had come off in the wash. The handgun in his hand looked polite, like a premium product. "I'm disappointed," Eamon said, as if Ren had backed into his recycling bin. "We'd hoped you'd accept the fix. Most do." Sera hit the closest guard like an answer key, dropped him without killing him, pivoted into a containment arc that lit the air blue and made Ren's teeth cry. Two more arcs painted corners of her world. She slipped, weaved, moved in short vicious angles that told Ren how much she'd been practicing not to. "Stand down," Eamon called, almost bored. "Officer Voss, you are subject." The third guard stepped out of shadow. Ren went cold. He could tell by the careful way the man positioned that he actually knew how to fight. Sera did something ugly and efficient with a knee that made the man rethink his career, but they were losing time. Ren's fingers shook so hard the Scrambler's battery grip clicked in his teeth. "Drop it," Eamon said mildly, "and we'll make your headache go away forever." A new voice chimed from the colonnade, surprisingly cheerful. "My headache won't." Quill Harker walked into the light with a cannon that had never been on a requisition form. Two older patrol officers flanked them, worn calm and the kind of competence nobody posts about. "Private security," Eamon snapped, composure finally loosening. "No jurisdiction." "Incapacitation without arrest equals assault," Quill said. "Equals my jurisdiction, equals shut up." They fired a warning bolt that took the paint off a bench and lit the night with truth. Chaos tightened like a fist. The guards turned. Sera saw the hole and dove through it. Ren didn't think. He tore open the access plate. The helix's nervous system blinked back. Prismatic fiber, crystal ports, the soft hum of a machine that thought it was a god. He set the Scrambler against the interface and found the frequency like a person finding a note in their throat. Keys rattled under his fingers. Somewhere behind him, Sera roared as if telling the world which part she intended to keep. The Scrambler wanted to work. That was the miracle, and the horror. Aurelia had built something so beautifully consistent that breaking it felt like playing it. Ren fell into the math. Time stretched like gum. The battle around him was percussion and lightning. He knew the point at which he would lose any chance at being a person who could go back to a desk job, and he stepped over it. A locking glyph thrummed. The helix answered. For half a heartbeat, Ren imagined what he would say to his mother if he'd ever told her anything. He pressed the final stud. The world pitched up. The hum that had been landscape curled into a scream that clawed at teeth and bone, then cracked like sugar glass. The helix's dreamlight flared, bled along seams, and then the crystal within it split with a sound so clean it wasn't a sound. Light went out. Sound went out. Everything that had been pushing down on Solace Bluff lifted like weather. Ren's knees hit stone. He understood, viscerally, silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of intention. He laughed, and it sounded like a child hearing his voice in a cave. Sera tore Eamon's sonic emitter off his wrist with a motion that left Eamon gasping like a fish. The remaining guards glanced at a world that no longer had someone's thumb on it, and made a sequence of decisions that ended with their rifles on the ground. Quill kept their cannon ready in case decisions became recursive. Sera looked at Ren in the new dark like someone looking at a person and not a problem. It is a powerful, dangerous thing to be seen that way. Ren stood up and realized the Scrambler was smoking. He kissed it as if it were a dog that had come when called and set it on the ground like a relic. Aurelia spun a story within 24 hours, a geothermal hiccup, a maintenance oversight, a temporary civic art closure. The founder's helix was removed under tarps and apologies. Eamon Harlow left Solace Bluff between one midnight and the next, a moving van full of boxes that had probably never been opened. Quill wrote a report that was both technical and sharp as glass. Sera filed hers in language so neutral it seethed. Someone in an office higher than all the cameras stamped the files as classified and slid them into digital dark. Nobody talked about psychoacoustic fields on the local channel, and yet the cafes got louder. Couples argued under trees and made up without looking over their shoulders. Kids fell and howled and were scooped up by parents who did not perform it for the neighborhood feed. Wren had expected immediate bliss. What came instead was weather. He found he preferred it. He also found that silence, true silence, had an ache to it if you sat in it alone. When the doorbell chimed, it always sounded sweeter than he remembered. He already knew who stood on the other side. Sera wore civvies again, the slate tuner and trousers, her fur throwing the last teach of sunset back at the world. Her eyes were amber open, not the narrowed professional shade. I hope I'm not interrupting. They didn't speak about Aurelia or Eamon or the elegant violence in Sera's body. They spoke about coffee and the wrongness of synth croissants, about Wren's plan to rejoin something that had the word team in it, about Sera's grandmother who'd taught her to sit very still and hold a cup without spilling when the entire village pounded drums. At some point, the streetlights outside shifted hue and no one told them to go to bed. The house was truly quiet. Wren understood, with a certainty that had no diagram, that he had not wanted the absence of noise so much as the presence of a person who could share it without trying to fix it. "Stay," he said, careful and bold. Sera's ear flicked, the fox part finding humor in the human. "For tea," he added, and smiled at himself for adding the thing he didn't need to add. "For tea?" she said, which was also for more. They drank from simple cups, and Wren discovered a new sound, the soft, almost inaudible brush of orange fur against the fabric of his chair, when Sera leaned back and let herself be carried by a room that wasn't pretending to be perfect. The morning after their not argument about tea, Solace Bluff felt like a town again. People had shadows. A barista forgot an order and apologized in a way that wasn't scripted. Wren walked the greenway and heard wind as movement instead of calming protocol. He also heard whispers with teeth. Two men on a bench muttered about vandals who'd broken our helix. A woman with a clipboard asked leading questions about whether folks felt safe. Wren recognized the gamed survey from his old life and found he had less tolerance for being handled. Sera met him at the relay stone. The panel was locked and dead. "We can't undo what they did," she said. "We also can't pretend they won't try again somewhere else." Wren touched the panel's seam. "They're good at pretending. We're good at breaking the illusion at the worst possible time for them." "That's comfortingly reckless," Sera said, tail flicking once like punctuation. "I've been asked to take a leave, to process the incident, which of course means decide whether I belong to the Bureau or to the city more." "Both," Wren said immediately, and surprised them both with how stubbornly he meant it. Quill texted a string of celebratory skulls and a link to a repository named Founder Shellick's Forensics Public. "Oops," they wrote. "I tripped." The file fell into an encrypted forum for municipal watchdogs. Sera read the note and huffed a small laugh that held an earthquake's worth of ease. "They'll classify that forum by lunch," she said. "They will," Wren agreed. "And then somebody else will mirror it. Weather." They walked the long way back, through the market where a violinist misjudged a phrase and flushed and kept going. Wren found the awkwardness more moving than any perfect chord he'd paid for. He watched Sera watch a dog whose head could not decide between her scent and a dried fish stand, and he realized the hum had never actually wanted him to stop listening. It had wanted to own where he gave his attention. He felt grateful for being impolite. At a crosswalk, Sera reached past him to press the button, her hand brushing his. "You know," she said, as the light chimed green, "I kept telling rookies the job is to arrive and not to escalate. You arrived with a chart and forced a choice. I don't know if I should write that into the manual or burn the manual." "Write it on a napkin," Wren said. "Leave it at the cafe. That's how religions start." Sera's laugh was soft and vulpine and absolutely human. "Eat," she said, and tilted her head at a stall selling something that pretended to be tacos and failed nobly. They ate sitting on the curb, and the curb did not remind them how they were supposed to sit. Aurelia would survive. Cities shaped by its products would tune themselves as cheaper choirs. But Solace Bluff had a scar now, and scars instruct. Wren went home with Sera and put his old oscillators back on a shelf he could see from the couch. Tools, not fetishes. He flipped his notebook to a clean page. He wrote not a chart, but a list of names. Quill Harker, the Sera Voss. People he could call when the weather went wrong. Outside, someone argued warmly about trash pickup times. A child drummed on a planter with chopsticks. Behind it all, for the first time in weeks, the silence was not a presence or a threat. It was space. He handed Sera the pen. She drew an ear with a star above it, amused and unsentimental and proud. Listening, she said, and underlined it twice. They held a small... Sera wore a rust-red jacket that matched her fur as if the sun had diffused across shoulders and decided to stay. People asked to touch her tail. She permitted a child to try and then yanked it away just before success with a grin that caused an entire table to reconsider their priors about humanoid vulpines and comedy. Eamon Harlow didn't appear. His house went on the market under a shell company that sanitized its sales copy until it was a glass of water with all the minerals removed. Someone would buy it and install a white couch and a framed map of a city they'd never visit. Wren tried not to judge the hypothetical. They would be neighbors until proven otherwise. He found himself at the food table next to Sera. The char on the carrots was perfect by accident. "We didn't fix everything," he said. It wasn't self-reproach. It was inventory. "Good," Sera said. "Everything isn't ours to fix." They stood in silence that didn't demand. Then Sera said, "If they come back, different name, different story. The hum will sound different to someone else. We may not hear it in time." "We being literal," Wren said, and tilted his head toward the crowd. Quill coaching a teen in how to solder a pin light onto a skateboard. The elderly couple arguing affectionately about whether to dance to a cover. The child who had nearly touched Sera's tail now listening to a cricket in a jar like it was a sacred temple. Sera's ear flicked toward him, not to the crowd. "We being you and I literal," she said, and the night's temperature changed by a degree he felt at the base of his pretense. Her hand found his again, unperformed. No algorithm. A fox's smile. If foxes had discovered what it meant to be relieved inside another person's door. Wren thought of that first 19-minute confession the town had dripped into his life. He raised an imaginary glass. "To impolite hearing," he said. Sera clinked back, nothing against nothing, and it felt like something being built. "To the weather," she answered, "and to pressing the right button at the right time." They walked home with the party still in their hair. At his threshold she said nothing, and he said less, which was the correct number of words for a door that had learned to admit a wider spectrum of quiet. Inside, in that Austinized hush a house has when it wants to be a stage and a shelter at once, they discovered a new hum. It arrived not every 19 minutes, but whenever two voices found their way to the same frequency for a moment, then held off to let the silence speak. Wren set the scrambler, the spent, scarred rectangle, on a shelf by the door like a coat hook that held a history. He wrote one last note in the cedar book. Not an amplitude, not a cadence, not a chart. He wrote a name. Then another. Then he closed the book and didn't lock it. "Tea?" he asked, "because some rituals matter." "Tea," Sera said, and the house, courteous now by choice rather than programming, made room. Weeks folded into something that might be called peace, though peace is just the pause between discoveries. Wren found himself sleeping without calculation. No meters, no charts, no anxious ear pressed to the wall. Yet even calm, left unattended, breeds its own restlessness. He began to wonder how far the helix's resonance had spread before it broke. How many other cities hummed their citizens to contentment? Sera sensed it before he said it. She always did. "You're building it in your head again," she murmured one night, tail brushing his leg under the table. "Just thinking. Thinking is building," she replied, sipping her tea, "and I can hear the foundation work. He smiled, defeated and adoring. If Solace Bluff was one node, there must be others. The math doesn't stop here. Then neither do we, she said simply, and that was how it began again, not as rebellion, but as responsibility. With Quill's reluctant help, they created something new, a listening map. They coded it to track low-frequency anomalies cross-reference with behavioral flattening indicators, cities where crime birth rates, and even artistic output had mysteriously declined while consumption and compliance had risen. Wren called it the Atlas of Quiet. Sera called it evidence waiting for courage. Dots pulsed across the continent. Dozens. Then hundreds. Each one a hum, Wren said softly. Quill folded their arms. Each one a job for people who haven't yet realized they're awake. The Bureau didn't sanction their work. The Bureau didn't stop them either. Bureaucracies evolve around integrity the way rivers evolve around stone. One dot pulsed harder than the rest. An industrial city 300 kilometers north. Mercer Gate, known for its clean factories and suspiciously content. Mercer Gate smelled of rain and static. Its skyline glowed in polite gradients. No hard edges, no shadows sharp enough to remind citizens of depth. The people moved with rehearsed serenity, every conversation edited to the highlight reel of existence. Wren recognized the look in their eyes, contentment that didn't belong to them. Their rental apartment came pre-stocked with pre-approved art that looked suspiciously like therapy sessions translated into Decker. Wren covered the one labeled Flow and Belonging with a towel. Sera replaced it with a printout of a fox sketch he'd made absent-mindedly on the train. "We'll need something real on the wall," she said. "Even if it's us pretending to be real." They listened for 2 nights before the hum revealed itself, subtle, elegant, too confident to hide. It emanated from an abandoned industrial spire by the riverside, once a refinery, now repurposed as a wellness data hub. The irony was exquisite. "Same pattern," Wren whispered, eyes half closed as he plotted the cadence. Sera's ears flicked forward. "Not quite. There's an overlay, another signal. Human." She turned, eyes narrowing. "They're transmitting something else on top of it." Wren's pulse doubled. "Testing adaptive resonance, a response loop. The system is learning from dissent. And from us," Sera said grimly. They shared a look that meant no turning back. The spire's interior was cathedral dark. Rows of servers hummed like monks, chanting into their own chests. In the center stood a familiar shape, a lattice heart, larger, sleeker, webbed in gold instead of copper. Wren approached as if meeting an old enemy who had borrowed his face. Sera took position near the door, pulse weapon drawn but angled down. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating. The voice that broke the air wasn't mechanical. It was Eamon Harlow. "I warned you, Wren," it said, too calm to be alive. A hologram shimmered into form. A perfect rendering of Eamon's head, smiling with digital regret. "You think you stopped us. You only taught the song to sing quieter. You made it evolve." Sera raised her weapon. "Projection only," she muttered, scanning the air. "Correct," Eamon's ghost said. "But it listens. As do all of them now." The hum deepened. Screens along the wall flickered, flashing fragments of faces. People across cities, eyes blank, lips moving in perfect unison. Sera's tail bristled. "It's sinking them." Wren's hands trembled over his bag. "We can't scramble it this time. It's distributed. We'd need to teach it dissonance instead of silence." "Then do it," Sera said. "Make it forget harmony." He set the coils, reversed the polarity, and whispered as he worked. "Every pattern wants symmetry. So we break it with a note it can't predict." Wren fed the machine something irrational, a tone that was mathematically impossible, a frequency derived from the ratio of 2 prime numbers that could never repeat cleanly. The lattice heart stuttered. The hum bent. Screens shattered into static mosaics of half smiles and half cries. For a heartbeat, every city on the atlas flickered. Then, through the crack of noise, came something that might have been laughter, or sobbing, or the birth of freedom. The lattice imploded. Light ate itself. Wren collapsed, ears ringing. Sera dragged him clear as the servers went nova in a blossom of cold blue. They watched the tower burn from the riverbank. No alarms sounded. No drones came. The city slept, really slept, for the first time in years. Sera leaned against him, exhausted but alive. That note? What did you call it? Wren smiled faintly, voice shaking. The one that shouldn't exist. Her amber eyes caught the reflection of the flames. Then maybe that's our name now. He laughed weakly. The note that shouldn't exist? Better than the Bureau of Overdue Chaos, she said. Months later, headlines whispered of unexplained wakeful anomalies spreading across the continent, towns whose residents reported uncharacteristic emotional volatility and non-compliance with product engagement initiatives. No one could trace the cause. Aurelia denied everything. Wren and Sera didn't read the news much anymore. They were somewhere in the mountains, fixing a broken radio tower that no longer needed to be fixed. Quill sent messages through encrypted bursts, always ending with the same line. The world's getting noisy again. Isn't it beautiful? Some nights the wind outside the cabin moaned through the rafters, carrying frequencies Wren couldn't chart and Sera couldn't name. They didn't try to. They named it quietly, because loud names attract nets. The listening network began as a spreadsheet Quill refused to admit was beautiful. Code names, cities, cadence notes, human volunteers annotated with qualities instead of titles. Patient, gets things done, asks real questions. Wren added a column called Weather, Sun, Overcast, Thunder, the mood of each place as reported by people brave enough to listen without a soundtrack. Sera taught the first cohort what no manual covered: how to stand still when every instinct wanted movement, how to hear intent behind volume, how to move without becoming noise. She had them practice in the market with eyes closed, mapping footfalls and breaths. You cannot fix what you refuse to perceive, she told them. You cannot perceive if you demand to be main character. They recruited lightly, avoiding zealots. A baker who rose at 4. A bus dispatcher who knew the city's pulse by late departures. A retired welder whose tinnitus made him an unexpected savant at identifying dirty power lines. Sera bent to each person's strengths. Wren built the portable tools. Palm-sized analyzers. Broadband dissonance charms that hummed irrational primes. Scramblers with Deadman switches. Quill populated a dead-drop mesh library bookplates with steganographic QR codes, knitting patterns that compiled into maps. Aurelia noticed the ripples, not publicly. Subsidies tightened, guidelines clarified. New community managers appeared with smiles that looked audited. On a Thursday at 11:19, a courthouse elevator stalled just long enough for a listening network courier to miss a train. On a Monday at 9 o'clock, 3 local news segments ran the same human interest piece about the comfort of routines, verbatim down to the pauses. Counter-programming, Wren murmured, watching with the sound off. Then we won't be a program, Sera said, and taped over the television's tiny camera with a fox sticker. The invitation arrived like a dare. Aurelia Dynamics cordially invites you to Gentle Futures, a community celebration of wellness and design. Under a glass dome, they promised art, music, a keynote on harmonic urbanity, and the unveiling of the Acanthus Aerae, a next-generation civic sculpture. That's a lattice heart with better PR, Quill said, working a slim blade across a battery shell. They want to demonstrate it in public to launder consent by applause. Wren traced the embossed leaf on the invitation. If they debut a frequency nobody on the atlas has sampled, we'll be flying blind. Sera rotated the card in her fingers, ears tilting like radar. I can get us in. Quill arched a brow. You'll stand out, even in a crowd that curated. Sera's smile was all teeth and gentleness. Then we'll plan for standing out. They cast themselves as what they were, a couple with questions. Wren wore an old suit with the shoulders tailored to the man he'd become. Sera chose a rust orange dress cut clean, a note of wildfire in a room of riverstones. They entered arm in arm. The host's eyes slid over them and recalibrated. People parted. Some of it was bias. Sera weaponized assumptions with surgical warmth. The Aerae rose in the dome's center, curved planes of pale stone veined with gold flowers etched where antennas hid. The keynote spoke of shared rhythms, civic care, taking the sharpness out of life's edges. The crowd nodded as if their necks were on Wi-Fi. Wren unfolded a microscanner camouflaged as a pocket square and caught the array's handshake cadence. Not the 19-minute of Solace Bluff nor the 21 of Mercer Gate. 15, compacted, efficient, woven with high-frequency lace that would slip through cheap dampers. He felt a press behind the eyes. Sera's ears flattened for a beat and recovered. And then someone across the floor waved. Eamon Harlow. Not a ghost this time, not a projection, different suit. Same smile. The kind seen in manuals. "Don't be baited," Sera murmured. "Too late," Wren said evenly, standing with just enough anger to look like posture. Eamon approached, palms open. "Wren? Officer Voss," Eamon said pleasantly. "How civilized. This is what you wanted, wasn't it? Transparency." "We wanted informed choice," Sera said. "Transparency without agency is just better glass." Eamon's smile didn't shift. "Agency presumes capacity. You overestimate the average appetite for friction." He leaned in, as if sharing a kindness. "You can't free people from what they vote to want." Wren kept his voice slow. "Then perhaps you should stop teaching the want." "Enjoy the art," Eamon said, already done with them. "It enjoys you." He moved on, leaving citrus cologne and the faint whine of power. 15 minutes, Sera whispered. "We walk, listen, map the exits. On the second cycle, we pinch the feed." The annex door was laminated in white oak veneer and a decal of a fern. A small sign read "Staff" in a font designed to soothe. Sera pressed her palm to the seam and listened with the pads of her fingers. Locks talk to those who can hear. "2 deadbolts electric," she breathed. "1 mag. No physical key." Quill's voice crackled in Wren's ear from 3 blocks away, babysitting a relay van. "Spoofing mag now. When I say bump, you slide a hairpin into the bottom seam and tell it a story about maintenance." "Bump," Quill said, and Sera's hairpin slid in, a musician finding a blue note. The door sighed. Inside, cool air and the clean hum of money. A wall of interfaces. A silk of cables converging on a kernel device, palm-sized, black, etched with a leaf. Wren's breath hitched. "Portable core," he whispered. They learned to keep the brain small. Sera stood where she could see corridor reflections in a brushed panel. 5 minutes. Wren anchored the dissonance charm to the core's frame, tuned it to irrational primes, and watched the UI ripple. The array's external lights stuttered and softened. Applause from the dome got confused and then recovered. He needed a deeper cut. He opened the kernel to find a surprise, a tiny slot for a microshard, crystalline and milky. The same material as the lattice hearts, miniaturized. "They're diffusing core function," he murmured. "Templatized. Swap and go." "Can you teach it dissonance?" Sera asked. "I can teach the shard to hum impolitely," Wren said, and smiled for the first time in half an hour. He seeded the shard with a dissonant seed, a note that refused symmetry. The system hiccuped, then began to learn around it. "They anticipated prime noise," Wren breathed. "They're catching it and smoothing the edge." "So we make an edge that cuts both ways," Sera said. She cupped her palm near the shard, heat of her body a tiny environmental perturbation. The shard's algorithm compensated. Wren toggled. Sera cooled, toggled again. A duet of noise. The shard couldn't file the variance under normal. Its model branched, then branched the branches, then herniated into trees. The UI froze. Sera's ears twitched. Footsteps. "Time," she said. Wren slid the shard back into its slot, the seed planted. The annex door sighed again behind them, deceptively gentle. In the dome, the array's keynote paused, smiled too hard, and invited everyone to the buffet. The room released breath. "Will it hold?" Sera asked. "It'll spread like moss," Wren said. "Slow, stubborn, and not very photogenic." "Good," Sera said, and they left by a door labeled "Service" that had never served anyone but the building. Back at the van, Quill spun a screen and froze it on a face none of them expected. Marga Lee, the Bureau's deputy director for community briefings, pragmatic, principled, the kind who wrote memos that fit on one page. She was walking with Eamon through a service corridor, speaking without moving her lips. They'd learned that trick long ago. Internal liaison, Quill said, voice paper cut flat. Explains the permits. The unsearch warranted searches. The accidents. Sera's pulse ticked in the hollow of her throat. I convinced myself the Bureau was only sluggish, not bought. Maybe she thinks she's laundered harm into help, Wren said carefully. We've both told ourselves prettier stories to survive uglier facts. Sera's gaze stayed on Marga's face. No more pretty, she said. But we don't do purity either. We do weather. Sometimes it rains in your house. They didn't confront Marga. Not yet. They watched her portfolio, where she redirected funding, which cities she advised, which pilot programs followed. A pattern emerged. She steered risk away from her own city, sacrificing smaller places to buy time for fixes in larger ones. A triage utilitarian could convince herself that was virtue. Offer her a third variable, Wren said. An exit ramp that doesn't require an apology in the congressional record. They drafted a file for Marga, evidence of the array's kernel, a map of seed shards, a prosecution-ready chain of custody. They transmitted it via a channel Quill swore on their favorite wrench could only be opened by Marga herself. Along with it, one line from Sera. If you want to do something good before you retire, here it is. No reply came. The atlas updated. 3 dots faded from red to orange without fanfare. Marga appeared on no rosters for a week. When she resurfaced, it was in a meeting leaked to a tiny union paper. She had argued in favor of a moratorium on ambient behavioral shaping, pending independent review. She's not clean, Quill said. She doesn't need to be, Sera replied. Her grandmother's house remained low, stone, stitched with liverwort, windows small against winter teeth. The old woman, Vesa, opened the door and let Sera into her arms without questions and with one keen look for Wren that took his measure and then set it in a place of respect. At night, Vesa sat by the hearth and told Wren stories he'd never find on any map. How Sera had learned to sit quiet in a storm so the goats would not panic. How young Foskets were taught to run toward thunder so it would never claim their backs. How strength has 2 hands and one of them is restraint. Sera listened, smiling, ears listening to 2 timelines. On the 3rd day, Vesa led them to the orchard, not apples, not pears, but ridgelines of tuned stones planted by ancestors who needed to measure windsong to plant without famines. The stones sang. Very softly, not to be heard so much as felt. Wren recognized the math and felt humbled by a people who discovered irrational primes with their wrists. Noise that refuses to reconcile can still guide, Vesa said, palm on stone. You've been fighting one song with another, good. But teach the young how to listen, not only how to cut. They stayed a week, then 2. Wren learned how to walk a hillside without rattling it. Sera rested in a way cities never permitted, their sleeping bodies finding a shape that felt like prophecy's twin, routine. The network held in their absence. Quill sent updates with pictures of tea in mugs not meant to be photographed. The atlas pulsed. Some reds to orange, some orange to yellow. Weather. On the last night, Vesa gave Sera a coil bracelet of hammered copper. For when you need to remember, the storm is also inside, she said. Sera fastened it below her uniform cuff as if it had always lived there. It happened in a good week, which is the habit of bad things. Wren was crossing a pedestrian bridge in Palisade City, scanning a suspect billboard with a borrowed spectrometer, when a white van drifted too close to the curb. Wren registered the angle, the rhythm of the tire, a split second too late. The door slid open. Gloved hands closed. A needle kissed his neck with engineered politeness. By the time Sera got Quill's burst, Wren's tracker went quiet mid-beat. He was in a room with carpet kind to knees. The walls were the color of second chances. A diffuser exhaled eucalyptus at amortized intervals. A woman in a cardigan sat across from him with a legal pad. She introduced herself as Kyra. No last name. "We're worried about you," Kyra said in a voice borrowed from radio meditations. "You sound tired." Wren blinked at the ceiling light, not point source, a cloudy pane. Mild sedatives tugged him toward compliance. He cataloged them by flavor. "You drugged and kidnapped me," he said gently. "I would call that concerning, yes." Kyra made a sympathetic mark on the pad. "Words like kidnapped create distance. We prefer recruited. You've been living in fracture, trying to carry the grief of a world that doesn't want your gift. Would you like to put it down?" Wren thought about Sera's ear twitching toward Rain. The sedative curled shyly around his will. "You don't have the right to ask me." "We're offering relief," Kyra insisted. "Think of the good you could do within the system. Advise. Help us tune away the sharpest harms." Wren pictured Margot Lee arguing in a small room and losing some days and winning others. "You're late to that pitch." Kira sighed. "Then we'll help you rest for a while." She pressed a button. The hum came, gentle as psalms. Wren closed his eyes and saw a hillside of tuned stones and a copper bracelet catching hearthlight. He breathed the way Sera taught recruits: inhale until you can feel your spine lengthen, exhale until you hear your pulse. He waited for a noise that refused to resolve and, inside the hum, found it his own breath. He tied his mind to the irrational ratio of his inhale to his exhale and rode it like a rope through weather. The door opened. Sera entered without theater and with a smile for the guard that took the man's attention like a toy. Then she stopped smiling. It was an education for the guard. The copper bracelet flashed. The sedative's fog burned off in Wren like mist under noon. They left a room full of sleeping men and a therapist murmuring to no one. Quill's stolen badge worked on 3 of 5 doors. Sera handled the other 2 with her ear and a hairpin's patience. In the vehicle bay, they found something shaped like a van and not burdened with an ethical. They ditched the van behind an abandoned mill and radioed the network on a channel that required a recipe for lemon bars to decode. Within an hour, 3 safe house options pulsed green. Within 4, the Atlas learned the location of 5 recruitment centers and the brands of their diffusers. Network members moved in quiet civilian clothing and undid things with competence born of library boards and union halls. 2 days later, a message arrived addressed to Sera and Wren, sent from a burner Quill traced to a parking lot behind City Hall. The sender, Margot Lee. "You were not meant to be flagged. The recruitment teams are not under my remit. I can make them back off, for now. In exchange, give me proof that the Acanthus shards are active in schools. If you're wrong, I burn. If you're right, I swing something larger than my title." Wren and Sera read it twice. Quill read it thrice and stabbed a potato with a screwdriver. She's still trying to balance a ledger written in chalk. "Sometimes chalk wins," Sera murmured. "We give her enough proof to require courage." They gathered records, procurement chains disguised as wellness grants, shipping manifests with euphemistic SKUs, maintenance tickets written by techs too tired to lie cleanly. They packaged it with a letter Wren wrote in the plain style of a person who has quit hating his own sentences. The hearing came 2 weeks later. Marga entered with a box of printed documents because paper still haunts. She asked questions that built a room around the witnesses and then invited everyone in. The phrase, ambient behavioral shaping, entered the public minutes of 3 governments. Aurelia pivoted. Investors used words like reputation headwinds. A mediocre executive resigned. A talented lawyer took a sabbatical. The shards didn't vanish, but some did. Weather. They celebrated where no one would script them. A night market under an overpass, lanterns strung like prudent stars, steam ghosting from bamboo baskets. Sera wore no uniform, and all her ease. Wren had ink on his fingers from printing zines that taught teenagers how to build passive filters and how to listen to their grandparents' stories for math. Quill arrived late with a tote full of resistors and a grin sharp as clean wire. "They'll adapt," they said, passing out skewers. "So will we." Sera watched a kid drum on an upturned bucket, the rhythm slouching, then surprising, then refusing to be contained. "We should teach classes," she said. "Not just tactics. Listening, ethics, history, and tea." Wren nodded, that inside smile he'd learned from her rising without seeking permission. "A school without a building," he said. Rooms in radios, syllabi in soup recipes. Exams at the moment someone needs you to be steady. Quill snorted. A University of Weather. Dean Voss. Provost Armitage. I'll be the lecturer who always swears. Sera's ears tilted toward a new sound. A violin taking up the Bucket Boys beat and mangling it into something generous. No amps. No sponsored speakers. No engineered chirp. Just people pushing air with wooden wire and lungs and finding joy in the friction. Wren reached for Sera's hand. She let him have it the way a fox lets the wind share its tail, without ownership and with grace. The atlas in his pocket pulsed, a new orange dot where a red had been, a new yellow where an orange surrendered. Some reversed. Some didn't. He felt the weight correctly, not as failure, not as triumph, but as weather called by its name. Listen, he said, though she already was. Sera smiled in that half-wild way that had taught him how to belong without shrinking. To the note that shouldn't exist, she said. They stood in a night without a soundtrack and were not lonely inside it. And far away, in a room with better glass, someone reached for a switch and hesitated long enough to hear themselves breathe. It started with thunder no one could predict. Not atmospheric, not even sonic, but bureaucratic. After Marga's hearing, a flood of internal documents escaped containment. Some deliberately leaked, some caught in the undertow of system backups left unsupervised by engineers who now doubted the ethics of their paycheck. They called it the Storm Archive. 42 terabytes of correspondence, development notes, budget proposals, field reports from behavioral units disguised as wellness surveys. Most of it was dry, numbers and scheduling and calibration notes. But threaded through the mundane were sentences that shivered when read aloud. Subjective compliance up 8% following extended exposure. Anomaly self-correct within 96 hours after neighborhood synchronization. The listening network turned archivist. Quill split the archive into packets disguised as everything from cooking tutorials to romance audiobooks. Each packet carried a key, a rhythmic variance in its waveform that the trained ear could decode. It wasn't just data, it was inoculation. Every download taught the ear to resist manufactured silence. Aurelia Dynamics responded predictably. Newscasts turned moral. Irresponsible actors, they said, spreading panic and misinformation. But the tone didn't land right anymore. The world had changed frequencies. Listeners were tuning themselves differently. In 1 week, 10 new nodes joined the atlas. In 1 month, 30. Red dots dimmed, orange flared, yellow stabilized. The map now looked like weather moving west. We're not a rebellion, Wren said one night, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We're an ecosystem. They can't outlaw adaptation. Sera, tracing her copper bracelet with one finger, murmured, "Evolution makes no arrests." Weeks later, a pattern began to emerge inside the archive itself, an embedded file structure that shouldn't exist. Each file carried a faint residual hum when played through analog systems, too low to hear but measurable. The hum had a rhythm. Wren mapped it. 18 minutes, 57 seconds, he said, stunned. That's not random. Someone encoded a beacon into the data dump. Sera's fur lifted slightly along her neck. A voice from inside Aurelia? Or from before it was Aurelia, Quill said. A seed left for when people finally listened. The beacon contained coordinates, not planetary but networked. Deep in the mesh, a ghost server responded to their ping. Its identifier, Project Cassandra. They followed it carefully, tracing data handoffs like stepping stones over dark water. The final node was buried beneath a derelict solar relay outside the city, its signal faint, heartbeat slow. When they accessed it, the screen filled with text, handwritten notes scanned decades earlier. We built Harmony Fields to treat trauma, not to pacify. The funding shifted, the board changed, and what began as therapy became infrastructure. If anyone finds this, the failsafe is not destruction, it's invitation. Teach the next generation to write their own frequency. Below it, an attached sound file, a single sustained tone that fluctuated in intervals matching human heartbeat irregularities. Never perfect, always alive. Sera played it once, twice, and then quietly said, "That's the sound of intent before corruption." Wren saved it under one name, Echo Proof, a baseline for what unmanipulated resonance could be. They sent it to the entire network. Within hours, every node of the atlas began using it as a calibration track. Wherever people played it, cafes, buses, city parks, something subtle happened. Conversations lasted longer. Laughter hit deeper registers. Aurelia's metrics plummeted. Engagement declined. Which meant, by their own logic, humanity was healing. He came back when everyone thought he'd fled off-world. A live interview, unauthorized, unfiltered, broadcast across local frequencies before any corporate handler could cut the feed. Eamon looked older. Lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless years and compromises too heavy to carry cleanly. "You think we were monsters," he began, voice steady. "We weren't. We were idealists. You begged for peace. We built it for you. But peace without dissonance is anesthesia, and you hate the ones who gave you what you asked for." Wren watched from a rooftop, jaw tight. Sera stood beside him, arms crossed, her tail flicking once. "He's trying to reclaim narrative," she said. "Maybe he's trying to confess," Wren murmured. On screen, Eamon leaned closer. "The system can't die because it lives in you. You built algorithms to predict your own hearts. You asked us to remove uncertainty. We did. And you called it tyranny." He paused, almost soft. "If you want the noise back, take it. But remember, you'll bleed with it." The feed cut. For days, the city buzzed with arguments. Some pitied him, some cursed him. Others wondered if he was right. But a curious thing happened. People were talking. Loudly, chaotically, gloriously alive. The hum was gone, and the world didn't collapse. It argued itself into color. Sera smiled. Maybe that's the first honest broadcast he's ever made. Months passed. Kaler, once a model of engineered tranquility, became something messier. Windows open at night. Music from balconies. Arguments in parks. Life with sharp edges. Wren worked with small councils, teaching citizens to maintain their own analog listening stations, tiny sanctuaries of static. Sera trained local responders, teaching how to discern when quiet meant peace. Aurelia Dynamics tried one last rebrand, pivoting to ethical sound architecture, but the name rang hollow. The market that once rewarded passivity now wanted imperfection. Investors fled. Subsidiaries were devoured by smaller, scrappier collectives who prized transparency over control. One evening, as real sunset painted Kaler's glass towers gold, Sera and Wren stood on a rooftop overlooking the city they had helped unmask. "Do you ever miss it?" Wren asked softly. "The hum," she said. "The illusion that everything was fine." Sera smiled, a slow, knowing curl of her lips, orange fur glowing in twilight. "I don't miss being numb, but I remember why people wanted it. The world is loud, Wren. It always will be. The trick isn't to quiet it. It's to find rhythm inside the roar." Below them, the city breathed. Unscripted. Uneven. Beautiful. The Atlas still existed, though no longer as rebellion. It had evolved into the Resonance Guild, a loose confederation of teachers, builders, and listeners. They met once a year in different cities under open skies, each gathering marked not by speeches, but by silence shared voluntarily. At the fifth gathering, Sera placed the copper bracelet onto a stone in the center circle. "For memory," she said simply. Wren brought the echo-proof recording, its tone slightly degraded by time. When he played it, birds fell silent, then resumed in new patterns, syncopated, alive. "Let's not make monuments," he said to the group. "Let's make echoes that can't be owned." When night fell, they lit lanterns of uneven glass, each glowing a different shade of imperfection. The air thrummed with laughter and argument, tears and embraces. Sera leaned against Wren's shoulder, her golden eyes reflecting the lights. "It started with one man who refused to ignore a noise," she whispered. "And one fox who refused to stop listening," he answered. They watched the lanterns rise, each carrying a fragment of irregular song into the stratosphere. The world below pulsed, not in unison, but in harmony born of difference. In that irregular rhythm, humanity found what the architects of peace had forgotten. That true serenity is not silence, it's shared dissonance understood. And as the last lantern flickered against the dark, Sera closed her eyes, hearing no hum, no engineered pulse, only the wild, infinite quiet of a world that had finally learned to listen to itself.